He was about to close a $900 million deal until a boy on the courthouse steps looked up and asked, "Are you the boss?" In that moment, everything stopped. No headlines, no cameras, just a child with a backpack, a sandwich, and a sister trapped behind locked doors. What happened next didn't just delay a deal. It sparked a movement that would change lives around the world. This isn't a story about power. It's about presence, and how one man's answer to a small question became the reason thousands of children were never forgotten again. The courthouse was old, columns worn smooth by 100 years of weather and 1,000 whispered arguments. But Ryan Maddox barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the doors ahead, mirrored sunglasses catching the pale gleam of the morning sun, phone to his ear, his stride a master class in calculated urgency. He was about to close a $900 million acquisition, his company's most aggressive move in over a decade. Behind those marble steps, in a conference room with bulletproof glass and contracts 2 inches thick, lawyers waited, executives waited, a notary with gold pens and a stopwatch waited. Ryan didn't wait for anyone. "Tell them I'll be there in 5, he said into the phone. "No, I don't care if the CFO from Kerwin wants another delay. If he wants a seat at the table, he should have been early. We're not here to hold his—" A small voice cut through the air. "Hey, are you the boss?" Ryan stopped, not because the voice was loud, but because it wasn't. It came from low to the ground, just off to his right, near the base of the courthouse steps. He turned. There, sitting on the 3rd step, legs swinging over the side like he didn't know better, or maybe didn't care, was a boy. 8, maybe 9. Threadbare hoodie, scuffed shoes, a worn backpack sat beside him, zipped open to reveal a crumpled juice box, a coloring book, and a single sandwich wrapped in foil. His face was flushed, either from the cold or from sitting too long in the shade. Ryan blinked. "What?" The boy pointed. "You're wearing a suit, and everyone listens to you on the phone. Are you the boss?" Ryan's assistant, trailing 2 steps behind with a leather briefcase and a folder of last-minute disclosures, started to speak. But Ryan held up one hand. He crouched, took off his sunglasses, and looked the boy in the eyes. "Yeah," he said, "I guess I am." The boy squinted. "Like, of everything?" Ryan almost smiled. "Of my company, not everything." The boy seemed to consider that. "Then maybe you can fix something." Ryan tilted his head. "What needs fixing?" The boy pointed toward the heavy oak doors. "They won't let me go in. Said I don't have anyone on the docket. That's what the guard said, but I'm not trying to sue anybody. I just need to find my sister." Ryan felt something stir behind his ribs. "Your sister's in there?" The boy nodded. "They took her this morning, social services. Said she had to go to a hearing about if we can stay together. I wasn't awake when they came." Ryan stood slowly. The courthouse loomed above him, massive and silent. "Where are your parents?" he asked gently. The boy looked away, then, almost too soft to hear, "Gone." Ryan swallowed. The assistant whispered, "Sir, we're late." But Ryan didn't move. His eyes were locked on the boy, on the way his knees knocked together, on the way he gripped the sandwich like it might be his last. He crouched again. "What's your name?" "Malik." Ryan nodded. "Okay, Malik, you stay here a minute." He turned to his assistant. "Push the meeting." The man paled. "Sir, we've got 10 attorneys inside and—" "I said push it. 10 minutes." "But—" Ryan looked at him, and the conversation ended. He marched up the steps, cutting past the security checkpoint, flashing a pass that opened doors even federal agents hesitated before blocking. Inside, he found the courthouse clerk, asked which courtroom had a hearing for a child placement this morning. He got a room number, a name. Ryan didn't need permission to enter. One look at his credentials, his face, and the doors opened. The room was sterile. 2 social workers, a tired judge, a small girl in a plastic chair, her legs too short for the floor. Ryan stepped in, and everything changed. The judge looked up first, then the 2 social workers. One of them stood immediately defensive, clipboard clutched like a shield. "Excuse me, this is a closed hearing." Ryan didn't blink. "I'm aware." The judge narrowed her eyes. "Mr. Maddox, isn't it? Unless you're this child's legal guardian or counsel, I'm afraid you're not permitted." "She has a brother," Ryan said, "sitting outside, alone." That made the room pause. The judge's gaze softened slightly. "We were told there were no next of kin available." "He's here now," Ryan said. "He wasn't given the chance to speak." The little girl in the chair, she couldn't have been more than 6, turned slowly toward him. She didn't smile. But something in her posture shifted. Not trust, exactly, but recognition, as if she'd known someone would come. She just hadn't known who. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Ryan asked, kneeling so he was eye level. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Maya." "Your brother's outside. Malik. He wants to be here. Would it be okay if I brought him in?" She nodded once, eyes wide. Ryan turned to the judge. "Give me 2 minutes." The judge hesitated, but she gestured toward the door. Outside, Malik was still sitting on the step, clutching the sandwich, kicking his feet. When he saw Ryan, he stood too fast, backpack thudding against his side. "Did you find her?" "She's inside," Ryan said. "She's waiting for you." Malik dropped the sandwich, took 2 steps, then stopped. "I'm not supposed to go in without someone." "You're not," Ryan said gently. "That's why I'm coming with you." They walked up the stairs together, Malik's sneakers thumping against the marble, too loud in the quiet corridor. When they stepped into the courtroom, Maya sat up straighter. Malik rushed to her side, threw his arms around her neck, and for the first time since Ryan had arrived, someone in the room cried. It wasn't the kids, it was the judge. She cleared her throat, adjusted her glasses, and said, "I assume we'll be amending the placement request." The social workers exchanged a look. Ryan stepped forward. "I'll cover the costs of temporary placement, housing, food, anything they need. Just keep them together." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly is your stake in this, Mr. Maddox?" Ryan looked at the children, Malik clinging to his sister, Maya holding his hand like it was oxygen. "They asked me if I was the boss," he said, "so I decided to act like it." The judge stared at him for a moment. Then she nodded. "So noted." She banged the gavel. The decision was made. Ryan didn't linger in the room. He let the social workers do their jobs, watched as Malik and Maya were walked down the hallway together, this time holding hands, this time not separated. Outside, his assistant looked like he'd seen a ghost. "We're 3 hours late," he whispered. Ryan glanced at his phone. Dozens of missed calls, his inbox blinking red. "I don't care." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, with respect." "Why?" Ryan looked out at the city beyond the columns, bright, loud, full of people who believed the only power that mattered was the kind that moved money. "Because sometimes," he said, "the only deal worth closing is the one that costs you something." And, without another word, he walked down the courthouse steps. Slower this time, not because he was tired, but because someone might need him to stop again. That evening, the sun dipped behind the city skyline in warm layers of gold and steel, casting a slow-moving shadow across Ryan's office floor. He stood by the window, tie loosened, blazer draped over a chair, phone silent for the first time in days. His assistant had rescheduled the acquisition meeting. The investors were furious. One had threatened to walk. Ryan didn't flinch. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't worried about the fallout. He was thinking about 2 kids in a safe foster home, tucked into the same room, their bags unpacked side by side. He was thinking about Malik's quiet question, "Are you the boss?" and what it meant to be seen that way by a child who had nothing left but hope. Behind him, the door opened with a soft knock. Lena, his chief of staff, stepped inside. She had a tablet in one hand, a file folder in the other. "I thought you'd want to know," she said gently. "The placement paperwork's been fast-tracked. Temporary guardianship granted to a family near Greenpoint. Siblings stay together. No more hearings scheduled. Ryan exhaled slowly. "Thank you." Lena hesitated. "That's not all. The press picked up the story. Courthouse clerk leaked a quote. Billionaire halts nine-figure deal to escort boy into courtroom." Ryan winced. "Fantastic. They're calling you the boss who waited. It's trending." He didn't answer. Lena waited another second. Then, in a quieter voice, "They're asking for a statement." Ryan turned back to the window, watched a bus pull into the station, watched people cross the street. Then he said, "Tell them it wasn't a pause, it was a priority." Lena gave a small smile and turned to go, but at the door she stopped again. "Ryan," she said, "you've done a lot of big things, but today, this might be the first one that actually matters." He didn't reply. She left. He stayed there a while longer, then he walked to his desk, pulled open the top drawer, and reached for a notepad. On the first page he scribbled something in sharp, even strokes. "If being the boss means nothing when someone needs you, then maybe you're not in charge of anything at all." He tore off the page, pinned it to the bulletin board above his desk, and beneath it added Malik, Maya, courthouse steps, April 11th. Remember. Because memory is what keeps the truth sharp, and some moments are too important to file away. That night, before going home, Ryan called a lawyer, asked what it would take to create a small emergency fund for kids like Malik. Not a press stunt, not a tax write-off, just something real, quiet, targeted. "Call it the first question," he said when they asked for a name. "Why that?" the lawyer said. Ryan paused. "Because that's where everything changed." The first question fund launched quietly. No press, no grand gala, no stock photos of smiling executives shaking hands. Just a line item in Ryan Maddox's private foundation filings, a new wing of the company that bypassed red tape and bureaucratic tangle to do one thing: step in when a child asked for help before the adults had figured out who was supposed to answer. Its first action, funding temporary housing for 6 siblings caught in a placement battle across 2 counties. The oldest had refused to leave without her brothers. The youngest couldn't speak yet. But someone, some caseworker who'd once heard about Malik and Maya, made the call. The check cleared the next morning. No signatures required. Ryan didn't tell anyone he was reading every single case file himself. He did it late at night, long after the rest of the world shut down. His penthouse was quiet then, the city still. The only sounds, the occasional siren far below, and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. Each file had a name, a face, a need that wasn't abstract, but sharp and immediate. He stopped thinking in numbers, started thinking in birthdays, favorite colors, how many nights they'd slept without a light. One evening, weeks after the fund began, he returned to the courthouse. Not for a deal, not for a case, just to walk the steps, to see if the world had changed even a little. It hadn't, not much. But as he reached the top, he saw a boy sitting on the side, maybe 10, maybe younger, holding a plastic bag with a hoodie inside, alone. Ryan slowed. The boy looked up. "Are you somebody important?" he asked. Ryan smiled faintly. "Not unless you need me to be." The boy didn't say anything. Ryan sat beside him, pulled out a granola bar from his coat pocket, and offered it. They sat in silence. After a few minutes, the boy said, "They said I have to wait for a grown-up who knows me." Ryan looked out over the city. "Then I guess you'll need someone to stay until they get here." The boy didn't move, didn't speak, but he didn't stop him either. And that was enough. Later, after a social worker arrived and the boy was safely taken in, Ryan walked down the steps again. Slower this time, less like a man on a mission and more like one who understood where he needed to be, exactly when he needed to be there. At the bottom, his driver waited with the car door open. "You're going to be late to dinner," he said gently. Ryan nodded. "It's okay," he replied. "Some meetings are more important than reservations." He slid into the car, pulled out his phone, and opened his notes app. Typed, "He didn't ask if I was rich. He didn't care about my title. He just needed someone to stay until the world remembered him." He saved it under a folder called Boss Lessons, because that's what it was. And deep down, he knew the first question would always find him again, and every time he'd be ready to answer it. Years later, Ryan Maddox's name was still etched across skyscrapers, etched in the corner of tech articles and legacy business reviews. But the titles that once defined him, CEO, founder, visionary, had faded in importance. Now, when people spoke about Ryan, they referenced something else entirely. They talked about the First Question Fund. It had grown, quietly, steadily. What began as a personal response to one boy's small voice on courthouse steps had evolved into a national initiative embedded in child advocacy organizations, family courts, and shelters. The fund provided rapid response resources when a child asked a question adults weren't ready to hear. Questions like, "Can I stay with my sister? Will someone come back for me? Do I have to go alone? Are you the boss?" In time, the fund's simple intake form became a fixture in courtrooms and waiting rooms, printed in 5 languages with just one line at the top. What's the first thing they asked? Ryan didn't run the fund anymore. He'd handed the reins to Malik, who had gone to college on a scholarship Ryan never took credit for, and who returned, older and quieter, with the same sharp eyes and a stronger voice. Malik became the new director at 29. On his first day, he placed a copy of the original courthouse transcript on his desk, not the one with his name, but the one where Ryan first walked into the hearing and said, "He's outside, alone." Ryan kept a photo on his wall. It wasn't of the courthouse or the children. It was of a single folded piece of paper, a note he'd once written the night after the first hearing. "Leadership isn't control, it's presence." He had framed it in wood, not glass, something that could breathe. One day, years after the fund had expanded overseas, Ryan was invited to a youth summit, not to speak, just to observe. He went alone, no team, no prep, just sat in the back row of a crowded high school auditorium where students from foster programs stood on stage and shared their stories. One of the last speakers was a girl named Vienna. She stepped to the mic, hands shaking slightly, holding nothing in front of her. No cards, no speech. She looked out at the crowd and said, "The first question I ever asked someone was, 'Can I stay with my brother?'" A murmur in the crowd. "And someone said yes," she continued, "not because they had to, but because they chose to." She looked down, then back up. And I just want to say, if you've ever answered one of those questions for a kid like me, if you've ever said yes when it would have been easier not to, thank you. You don't know what it saves. You don't always get to see. She stepped off the stage. Ryan blinked, eyes burning. As the crowd clapped, Vienna returned to her seat. A boy sitting beside her, 12, maybe 13, leaned over and whispered something. She laughed, whispered back. Ryan didn't approach her, didn't need to. He just slipped out the side door as the applause still echoed, the wind catching the edges of his coat. That night, back at home, he wrote one last note. He didn't save it on his phone. He wrote it on paper, folded it neatly, and placed it on the inside cover of his will. It read, "If I'm remembered for anything, let it be that I said yes to the first question and stayed long enough to hear the second." Then he put down his pen, turned off the light, and went to bed. And somewhere in the city, another child waited on courthouse steps, eyes scanning the crowd for someone who looked like they were in charge. And someone would stop, someone always would, because the answer had already been written, and the door never stopped opening. Years passed, and the First Question Fund became more than a program. It became a principle. Social work classes taught it as a model. Courts rewrote intake protocol around it. Police academies and hospital systems added it to their empathy training. The phrase First Question Protocol became shorthand for an approach that prioritized humanity before process. At its heart was the idea that every system failure started the same way. Someone asked a question, and no one answered. That idea outlasted boards and budgets and buzzwords. It embedded itself into the world's DNA, not because it was marketed, but because it was passed down, quietly, person to person, whispered in court hallways, printed on the inside cover of school planners, scribbled on the backs of intake forms. Ryan never returned to the front of the spotlight. He didn't need to. His days were quieter now, marked not by market swings, but by moments. Letters from caseworkers, emails from grown children who had once been just kids on courthouse steps. His hair had gone silver. His voice had softened, but his memory? Sharper than ever. He still visited the courthouse once a year, like a pilgrimage. No press, no fanfare, just him, a jacket, and the memory of a question that had altered his entire life trajectory. One day, as he sat on the third step, the same one Malik had once claimed, a girl sat beside him. Maybe 11, wide eyes, frayed backpack. She didn't speak for a while. Then, without looking at him, she asked, "Are you in charge of something?" Ryan smiled. "A few things." "You look like someone who could fix stuff." "I try." She was quiet for a moment. "My sister's in there," she said, motioning toward the courthouse doors. "They said I couldn't go." Ryan turned, looked at her. Not rushed, not calculating. Present. "What's your name?" "Layla." He nodded. "You want me to wait with you?" She glanced at him, surprised, then nodded. "Okay," he said. "We'll wait together." He didn't ask for details, didn't demand proof. He just stayed. And when the social worker finally came looking, flustered and overworked, Ryan stood and gently said, "She's with me. Let's make sure she's heard." It went like that for years. Quiet moments, open doors, paper trails that led not to vaults but to hands held. And when Ryan's time finally came, it wasn't at a gala or in a hospital bed with machines beeping around him. He passed peacefully in his sleep. The note was still in his will. "Let it be that I said yes to the first question." At his memorial, they didn't build a statue. They printed signs, thousands of them, handed them out at train stations, courthouses, shelters, schools. Each one said only, what was their first question? Did someone answer it? And beneath that, if not, you still can. People carried those signs into the next decade and into the one after that. Because love, real love, the kind that pauses, the kind that listens, the kind that rewrites the rules, never ends. It only passes forward. And someone, somewhere is still asking, "Are you the boss?" And someone else is still saying, "Yes, and I'm staying." 50 years after Ryan Maddox first stopped on those courthouse steps, a museum exhibit opened in his honor. Not in a financial hall of fame, not in a wing of business history. It was housed inside a children's justice center. The exhibit was small, intentionally so. The room was quiet, carpeted, walls lined with photos not of Ryan's corporate milestones, but of letters, drawings, and the lives shaped by a single choice. In the center of the room was a bench, plain wood, carved into the back in clean lettering. Sometimes the first question changes everything. Above the bench, displayed in a tall glass frame, was the note Ryan had written by hand so many years ago, the one he placed in his will. "If I'm remembered for anything, let it be that I said yes to the first question and stayed long enough to hear the second." Visitors came daily, not to see a relic, but to remember the weight of one pause. One day, a boy named Jalen, 10 years old, quiet as a shadow, visited with his class. He didn't say much, but he sat on the bench longer than anyone else. When the tour ended and the others filed out, Jalen slipped something from his pocket, a small folded piece of paper. He placed it gently on the bench before he left. Later, when the museum staff found it, they unfolded it carefully. Inside were just 6 words, written in a child's blocky, earnest print. I will be the one next. They didn't know who he was, but they didn't need to, because the story had always been about that. The next one, the next pause, the next hand reaching out and saying, I see you, and someone saying back, I've been waiting. The first question. Fund still operated, still invisible in its reach, still immediate in its presence. It wasn't a movement anymore, it was a part of the world. It was the thing people did when they didn't know what else to do. They listened, they stayed, they answered the question with action. And long after the final headline, the final fundraiser, the final word written about Ryan Maddox, a child would still stand at the foot of power. Ask, are you the boss? And someone, maybe young, maybe old, maybe a person who had once needed the same thing, would kneel down, smile, and say, right now, I am. What do you need? And the door would open again, like it always had, like it always will. Somewhere in a quiet suburb, long after the First Question Fund had become woven into the fabric of how the world responded to need, a retired social worker named Claire sat at her kitchen table, flipping through a stack of old notebooks she'd kept throughout her career. Most of them were filled with notes and intake forms, scribbled observations, names of children she'd met for only a moment, many of whom she never got to follow up with. But there was one name she always came back to, Malik. She had been the one who filed the emergency report that day, decades earlier, when he showed up on the courthouse steps alone. She hadn't known back then how history was about to bend. She hadn't known who the man in the suit was, but she'd seen the way Ryan had knelt down, how he spoke like the boy was the only person in the world. She watched it happen, and it had changed her. She pulled open her desk drawer and took out a letter. It was from Malik, written the year he became the new director of the fund. She'd never told anyone about it, but in it he wrote, "You were the first adult who believed I was telling the truth. You didn't interrupt. You didn't dismiss. You didn't run." Claire folded the letter back into its envelope. She didn't need a monument or an award. She had this, and sometimes that was more than enough. Down the street, a teenager named Ray was packing for her first year of college. She was nervous. First generation, no backup plan, full scholarship. She tucked her acceptance letter into her bag next to a small card someone had given her at a shelter 3 years ago. It had once been folded in half and wrinkled from time and rain, but the words still held. "Are you the boss?" On the back, someone had written, "No, but I'm here until the one who is shows up." Ray never found out who left it for her, but it had kept her going. She slipped it into the back of her journal and zipped her bag shut. Across the country, in a conference room filled with judges and policymakers, a young speaker stepped up to the podium. Her name was Layla. She adjusted the microphone, smiled gently, and opened with a story. "I was 8 when a man in a suit sat beside me on courthouse steps and asked me what I needed. I didn't have a case number. I didn't even know the word guardian. But he stayed. He stayed until the right person showed up. And because of that, I learned the one thing that every child should know before anything else happens to them. Your question matters." The room was silent, not because they were in awe, but because they knew the story. Everyone knew the story. They just hadn't realized it had made it this far. When Layla finished, she left a copy of the fund's new outreach packet on each table. It was simple, clean. Just one question printed across the cover in bold type. What was the first thing they asked? And in small print below, "Are you the one who will answer it?" The world had not been saved in a single moment, not with a speech, not even with a billion-dollar deal. It had been saved over and over by those who remembered how it all began. With a child, with a voice, with a question asked into silence, and a hand that reached back. Years later, in a quiet living room filled with afternoon light, Malik sat on a couch with his daughter curled beside him, a storybook balanced on both their laps. She was 6, curious, sharp-eyed, full of the same fire he once carried at that age, but without the fear. She'd never known a day without someone answering her questions. That was the point. They were reading a story about a girl who built a bridge across a canyon with her own hands. She stopped Malik mid-sentence. "Daddy," she said, "can one person really fix everything?" Malik smiled. "No," he said, "but one person can make sure no one falls." She blinked, thinking hard. "Did someone do that for you?" Malik didn't answer at first. He just reached behind him, pulled down a small framed photo from the shelf. It was old, faded. A courthouse, a man in a suit kneeling, a boy on the steps looking up. "That's him," Malik said. "He stopped when he didn't have to." She traced the glass with her finger. "Was he the boss?" Malik smiled. "He was that day." His daughter thought about that for a moment. Then she said, "I want to be that kind of boss." Malik kissed the top of her head. "I think you already are." That evening he wrote a letter. It was a tradition now. Every year, on the anniversary of the fund's founding, the director wrote one letter. No address, no name. Just placed in a sealed envelope in a vault at the foundation's original site, where hundreds of similar letters now lived. Some were from children, some from caseworkers, some from strangers who had once walked away and then came back. Malik's letter that year was short. "You asked if I was the boss. I wasn't. Not yet. But because of you, I became someone who never waits for permission to care. The world is better because you showed me how." He signed it simply, M. Then he folded it, placed it in the vault, and stood for a long moment in the quiet. Outside, the city buzzed on. A child somewhere was preparing to ask their first question, and somewhere else, someone was listening. Because the world didn't turn on wealth. It didn't turn on power. It turned on the moment someone stopped, looked down, heard the question, and said, "Yes, I'm the boss today. What do you need?" On the 100th anniversary of the First Question Fund, a gathering was held, not in a convention hall or a capital city, but on the courthouse steps where it had all begun. The marble was worn smooth now, but the structure still stood, timeless, unchanged. There were no VIP rows, no gold name tags, no velvet ropes, just people. Children, adults, caseworkers, teachers, families, judges, survivors. Carriers. Some held candles, some held hands, some held copies of the sign that started it all. "Are you the boss?" One by one, people stepped forward to share. A woman named Isa told of the time a man gave her a blanket and waited 3 hours until a social worker came. No badge, no name, just presence. A young man named Milo spoke of the day he found the card tucked under his cafeteria tray at school. It read, "You matter. Ask anything. We're listening." A social worker named Estelle, now in her 70s, wept as she told the crowd, "We used to have nothing but protocol. Now, we have memory." Then a girl named Kalia, not more than 11, stepped to the mic. She looked out at the sea of faces and said, "I don't remember my first question, but I remember the answer." The crowd fell silent. She held up a piece of paper, creased and faded. "What do you need?" "My foster mom asked me that," she said. And then she waited until I knew. The wind moved gently through the trees lining the street. Someone in the crowd whispered, "She stayed." Kalia nodded. "She still does." No one cheered. No one clapped. But something deep and wide moved through the people gathered there. Something older than grief, stronger than loss, more sacred than legacy. The idea that no life was too small to listen to, no question too early to answer, no person too ordinary to stop. Later, as the sun began to set behind the courthouse dome, each attendee was invited to take a card from the box placed at the top step. They were blank on one side. On the other, just one line. If you are the boss today, stay. People slipped them into wallets, tucked them into notebooks, left them on bus seats, pinned them to corkboards, passed them on, the way it had always worked. No monuments, no endings, just questions. And someone still listening. In a small town halfway across the world, a teenage boy named Ren sat on the roof of a shelter, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. His hands were in his pockets. His eyes, rimmed red, didn't blink much. Below him, the rest of the shelter had gone quiet for the night. Curfew passed, lights dimmed, counselors off shift. He pulled out a folded piece of paper someone had slipped into his bag the week before. He didn't know who. He hadn't shown it to anyone. It wasn't big, just a card, yellowed at the edges. One side was blank. The other read, "If you are the boss today, stay." Ren didn't know what kind of boss he was. He barely felt like a person some days. But he knew what it felt like when people left. He knew the sound of silence after a slammed door. He knew the look adults gave when they said they'd come back, but didn't. So he stayed, on the roof, watching, holding that card like it meant something. He didn't notice the smaller kid at first, maybe 8, sat on the edge of the opposite corner, knees hugged tight to his chest. They didn't speak for a while. Then finally the younger boy asked, "Are you in charge of this place?" Ren considered the question. He wasn't a staff member. He wasn't even old enough to sign his own release forms. But he looked over at the boy, thin, quiet, blinking into the wind like he didn't believe anyone would answer, and said, "Tonight, I guess I am." The boy nodded. "I was scared to come up here alone," he whispered. Ren slid closer. "You're not alone." They sat like that for a while, not saying much, but staying. And in the soft quiet between them, something sacred passed again from one soul to another. The story, the legacy, not of money or systems or titles, but of presence, of choosing to carry a message not because someone told you to, but because you couldn't imagine not carrying it anymore. Downstairs, a counselor closed their logbook and flipped the lights off. On the roof, the wind shifted gently, and another chapter wrote itself. Without paper, without signature, without spotlight, just a card, a rooftop, and one more kid, who stayed. Years later, Ren would become one of the youngest directors of a regional youth advocacy initiative in his country. Not because he chased it, but because the story chased him. The rooftop moment never left him. He didn't speak about it often, but he carried the card in his wallet through every interview, every speech, every policy meeting where someone said, "We don't have the resources," or "They'll have to wait," or worst of all, "That's not our responsibility." He'd pull the card out, set it on the table, and say, "Someone once stayed for me. Because of that, I'm still here. So, yes, it is." People listened. Because he wasn't trying to prove a point, he was living one. The movement that had started with Ryan, then Malik, then Elara, had now circled the globe, not as a brand, not as a nonprofit with press kits and marketing teams, but as a language, a silent understanding between those who knew what it felt like to be overlooked and those who had vowed never to overlook again. One year, at a global summit on youth care and early intervention policy, Ren was invited to speak. He was 31, the youngest on the schedule. He stood on stage, not in a suit, but in a plain button-up, sleeves rolled, hands steady. He told the story, not just his own, but the story of a man in a suit, of a boy on a courthouse steps, of the question that never stopped echoing. "Are you the boss?" He didn't embellish, didn't dramatize, just told it straight. And when he finished, he reached into his pocket and held up the same card, yellowed now, laminated to protect it from wear, but the words still clear. "If you are the boss today, stay," he said. "We can't always change everything, but we can choose to stay. And when we do, people survive. Sometimes they even begin to live." The room went still. Then it rose, not just to applaud, but to stand for something. Later, as people filtered out, a woman approached him, mid-60s, small frame, eyes like she carried 1,000 names. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "You reminded me why I started." "Are you in the work?" Ren asked. She nodded. "Retired now, but I used to be one of the first caseworkers connected to the First Question Fund. We didn't know what we were doing half the time, but we knew how to listen." Ren smiled. "That's all it ever was." She pulled something from her purse, an envelope. Inside was a card, almost identical to his. "I got this from a child in 1987, she said. "He said he made it himself. I've carried it ever since. But I think you're supposed to have it now." Ren took it, hands trembling just slightly. On the back of the card was a single sentence, written in crooked, confident print. "You're the boss now. Don't forget." Ren looked up and promised without words that he wouldn't. Because the story wasn't his, it wasn't anyone's. It belonged to whoever carried it next. Years later, long after Ren had passed that worn card along to a young organizer named Micah, an 18-year-old who just started a grassroots hotline for kids who didn't know who else to call, the story carried on like it always had, quietly, steadily, faithfully. Micah laminated the card, not to protect it from damage, but to preserve its fingerprints. He said it still held heat, like it remembered the hands it had passed through. He hung it above his desk, right next to a sticky note that read, "Don't measure success in numbers. Measure it in how many stayed." Micah didn't call himself a leader. He didn't use words like director or founder. When reporters asked, he just said, "I pick up the phone." One night, close to midnight, the line rang. He answered. A child's voice, young, breathless. "Are you the one in charge?" Micah closed his laptop, turned off his monitor. He leaned forward, grounded his voice. "Yeah," he said. "Right now, I am." There was a long pause on the other end, and then, "Okay." Micah stayed on the call for 47 minutes. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rush. When the child finally hung up, not with panic, but with something steadier, reluctant hope, Micah looked up at the card above his desk and whispered, "That's one more." He recorded the call in his notes, not with names or stats, but with a single line. "A child asked. We answered." That same week, a teacher in a remote village found a crumpled piece of paper on her desk. No name, no note, just the question, "Are you the boss?" She pinned it to the corkboard behind her desk. 3 years later, that corkboard would be featured in a documentary about rural education reform. Viewers around the world would pause the screen, zoom in, and see the beginning again. Because even when the world changes, the needs don't. The question remains. The form it takes may evolve. Voice messages, graffiti, text threads, scrap paper, under cafeteria trays. But it's always the same. Will you stop? Will you stay? Are you the one who will hear me? Are you the boss today? And the story continues, not in museums or foundations, but in bedrooms and back seats, in courthouses and community centers, in whispered conversations between kids who have nothing but each other and the courage to believe someone might listen. And someone always does, because someone always has. Somewhere in a city lit by the glow of buses and storefronts, a child named Tavi sat on the floor of a laundromat just before closing. The plastic chairs were empty. The hum of dryers echoed like soft drums overhead. Tavi's backpack was zipped shut at their feet, but it didn't carry much. A crumpled sweatshirt, a journal, a piece of paper someone had handed them at a shelter 2 nights earlier, pressed into their palm like a secret. Tavi hadn't opened it then. Now they did. Inside, written in blue ink, were just 7 words. "If you're the boss today, stay awake." No explanation, no name. But something in Tavi's chest cracked, quiet and clean. Not like breaking, like breathing. They stared at the words for a long time. And when a woman came in, maybe early 20s, hair tied up, baby on her hip, and laundry dragging behind her, Tavi stood and held the door without being asked. The woman looked at them. "You work here?" Tavi shrugged. Sort of. The woman smiled. Thanks. Later, after she left, Tavi took out a pen and turned the card over. Wrote, I stayed today. They didn't know where to send it, so they folded it again, tucked it into the dryer handle, and left. The next morning, the cleaner found it. He didn't throw it away. He carried it in his pocket all day. That afternoon, he gave it to a teenager waiting outside the clinic, knees shaking in jeans 2 sizes too small, holding a plastic bag of prescriptions they didn't know how to take. The card passed hands again, and again, and again. Sometimes it came back with new ink, sometimes with fingerprints, sometimes with silence. But it always came back, because every time the world forgets, every time systems stall and people disappear, a question still waits on a step, a bench, a phone line, a dryer handle. Are you the boss today? And the answer, every time in some form, is, yes, I am, and I'm not leaving. In a village tucked between mountains and slow-moving rivers, a school teacher named Amara stood before her class, holding up a piece of paper she had laminated herself. It had been mailed to her anonymously 5 years ago, folded into a library donation envelope. No letter, no name, just the sentence, if you're the boss today, stay awake. She didn't know who wrote it, but she had stayed awake. Every day since, she had opened her classroom door 10 minutes early, just in case someone came needing silence or food or to say nothing at all. They always did. Now she held up that same paper in front of 20 children, many of whom hadn't known before this year what it felt like to be chosen for something other than punishment. She said, "You are allowed to matter first." She taped the message to the blackboard. Below it, in chalk, she wrote, "What was the first thing they asked?" A boy in the back, Juno, who hadn't spoken all semester, raised his hand. "They asked if I was going to leave again." Amara nodded. "And what did you say?" He looked around. "I didn't say anything, but I stayed." "That's a perfect answer," she said. Another student, Samira, whispered, "My cousin asked if there was food. That was her first question." Amara wrote that one down too. Before long, the board filled. Not with academic goals, but with first questions. Am I safe? Can my sister come? Is it always like this? Will I have to lie? Will someone believe me? Is it my fault? They didn't erase the board. The janitor left it intact for weeks. Visitors came and stared at it in silence. And one night, a regional education official walked into the room for an inspection. He paused at the wall of first questions, arms folded, breath shallow. He stood there a long time. Then he took a note card from his pocket, scribbled a message, and left it on Amara's desk. She found it after he'd gone. It read, "I asked, am I the only one?" No one answered. Until now. She folded the card and placed it beside the laminated one. Then she added a new sentence to the board. "If you have no answer yet, stay." And they did. Children, teachers, friends, neighbors, not forever. Just long enough for someone else to find the courage to ask again, because that's all it ever was, a question, and the echo of someone who didn't leave. Years later, the village classroom became more than a room. People began to visit, not because it was famous, but because someone told them quietly that it was a place where questions were safe. A place where no one got erased for speaking too soon, too soft, or too scared. The board was still there, now sealed behind glass. Not to preserve it like a relic, but to keep the words alive in the exact hand that first wrote them. Visitors brought their own questions, scribbled on cards, slips of paper fabric. They slid them into a wooden box labeled simply, "First Words." Once a year, Amara and her students read them out loud. Not to analyze, not to correct, just to honor. Will I be sent back? If I tell the truth, will I still have a home? Is anyone real? Do I have to be strong today? A girl named Noor, now 15 and the school's softest voice, began answering them in the margins of her notebook. She didn't always know what to say, but she tried. She wrote things like, "Maybe not yet, but I see you. I don't know how long it takes, but I believe in after. You don't have to be strong, you just have to arrive. Her teacher found the notebook, and instead of asking her to stop, Amara copied the entries and posted them next to the question wall. It became a tradition. Question, response, a dialogue between those who feared and those who stayed. One spring, a journalist wandered into the village, looking for something else entirely. He found the classroom. He wrote an article that was read by 500,000 people in 3 days. He called it The Wall That Listens. Letters flooded in from cities, from deserts, from prisons and shelters and refugee camps and nursing homes, each one holding a first question, each one carrying the same quiet plea. Is anyone still awake? And each one answered in the same way, yes, yes, we are. And we're staying until you stop asking, or until you believe you don't have to anymore. 100 years after the first child sat on the courthouse steps and asked, "Are you the boss?" the world marked the day, not with a holiday, but with a pause. At noon in every time zone, bells rang. Not loud, not long, just once. To remind whoever could hear them, a question once asked has never stopped echoing. In classrooms, courthouses, subways, shelters, youth centers, clinics, people paused, not to mourn, but to listen. In the village where Amara had once taught, her students, now grown, now teachers themselves, held a quiet gathering in the same classroom. The wall of first questions remained, its wood faded, but intact. The answers from Noor were now etched on metal plaques, read every day by those still learning how to believe their voice was allowed. One child, age 9, approached the wall with a folded piece of paper in hand. He placed it into the wooden box beneath the glass. When the teacher later opened it, she found a simple line. If someone stayed for me, I want to stay for someone else. That night, across oceans, a girl in a crowded refugee intake center whispered to a volunteer, "Are you the one in charge?" The volunteer knelt beside her and replied, "Today I am. What do you need?" And in a crowded city, a man who once slept beneath train platforms sat behind a microphone on a live broadcast and read, for the 1,000th time, the message that had saved him. If you are the boss today, stay. The line crackled softly. Then the calls came in. They always did. Because somewhere, someone still carried the card. Still paused at the sound of a child's question. Still answered the knock on a door that wasn't theirs. Still opened their hand when they didn't have much else to give. And that's how the story lived. Not in books, but in action, in choice, in presence. In every heartbeat of someone who remembered that the world doesn't get better when the powerful do more. It gets better when anyone decides to be present. When someone, anyone, hears the question, "Are you the boss?" and chooses to say, "Yes, because I'm still here, and I'm not leaving." And somewhere, maybe in a city, maybe on the edge of nowhere, a child sat alone. They didn't have a name they trusted strangers with yet. They didn't know what would happen tomorrow. But they had a question building inside their chest like breath held too long. They weren't sure they were allowed to ask it. They weren't sure anyone would answer, but still, they asked. To the night, to the wind, to whoever might be listening. Is anyone in charge? And miles away, maybe in a crowded apartment with peeling walls, or a shelter office lit by one flickering bulb, or a diner after closing, someone paused, felt it, turned off their phone, closed their laptop, stood up slowly, and said quietly, "I am now." They stepped into the hallway, or across the room, or into the story. They didn't wait for the system, or permission, or the perfect words. They simply chose to stay, because the story was never about heroism. It was always about the ones who heard the smallest voices and answered anyway. So, the question lives on, passed like flame from one open hand to another, and every time it's asked, in whispers, in ink, in silence, in hope, someone picks it up, folds it gently, and carries it forward, until the next child asks. And someone new says, "Yes, I'm the boss today. What do you need?" And so the door stays open forever. And so the story, that soft, steady story, never really ends. It moves forward like breath, like light, like a promise whispered through generations who never met, yet knew one another by the shape of a question. In a quiet park in a city neither rich nor forgotten, a new plaque stands near a playground, not grand, not marble, just a small bronze square on a wooden bench where parents rest and children gather. It says, "This bench is for the one who stops," and underneath, etched deeper. What was their first question? Did you answer it? People sit there every day. Some know the story, some don't. But they still pause, they still look. And sometimes a child comes and asks something simple, something quiet. "Can I sit here? Will you be here when I get back? Do you know how to fix this toy?" And someone always answers, not because it's policy, not because it's profitable, but because someone, somewhere long ago, knelt on courthouse steps and chose to stay. Because a boy named Malik once asked for his sister. Because a girl named Maya waited. Because a man named Ryan, facing $900 million and 100 distractions, heard a question too honest to ignore. And because thousands since have carried that answer, some in their hands, some in their eyes, some in their presence. Now you do too. You carry it. Even if you've never needed it before, even if you've never had to say the words aloud. You know what it means, you know what it costs, and you know what it gives. So if one day someone looks up at you and asks, "Are you the boss?" Take a breath, stand still, and remember what every life in this story has already proven true. You don't have to save the world. You just have to stay. That's where the world begins again. And in time you will be asked, maybe not on courthouse steps, maybe not by a child, maybe not with words at all, but the question will come. It might look like a student falling asleep at the back of the class every day, but never missing a single one. It might sound like a quiet, "I'm fine," from a voice that trembles too slightly. It might be a neighbor who lingers too long in the hallway, a friend who jokes a little too sharply, a stranger sitting too still in a place meant for movement. And something in you will feel it, that flicker of a question beneath their silence. Will you see me? Will you stay? Are you in charge of something that matters? And you'll have a choice, to keep walking, to pass the moment, to let the world keep spinning untouched, or to stop, to kneel down, to look them in the eyes the way Ryan did, the way Malik was seen, the way Maya waited to be, and say, "Right now I am, and I'm not leaving." And maybe they won't believe you right away. That's okay. Stay anyway. Let your presence answer what your promises can't yet prove. Because that's what every boss in this story has done, not with power, not with certainty, but with willingness. To be still, to be kind, to be the one who doesn't disappear. And whether you carry a laminated card or a folded note, or just the shape of the story written across your memory, know this: the next chapter is yours, and the door is still open. And somewhere right now, a new hand is reaching for that door. They don't know the whole story. They haven't read the names. They haven't seen the plaques or the classrooms or the folded notes passed from courthouse benches to school desks to subway seats. But they know what it feels like to be afraid of asking. And they're about to ask anyway, because every version of this story begins the same way, with someone brave enough to hope there might be an answer, and someone else brave enough to be it. That's you now, not because you asked for it, but because you know what it means to wait, to hurt, to wonder if someone will stay, and you know what it means when they do. So when the next voice, small or shaking or silent, asks if you're in charge, don't check the room. Don't wait for someone more qualified. Don't pretend you didn't hear it. Just remember, all the lives before yours that bent toward healing because one person said, "I am," and then stayed and then stayed and then stayed. So when the question comes, step into the pause. Open the door. Say it like a promise you'll keep. Yes, I'm the boss today, and I'm staying until the next one comes. And the story will carry on through you. And when the next one does come, the next child, the next question, the next quiet moment daring to ask if someone will listen, you will already be ready. Not because you have a title, not because you have the answers, but because you made the choice long ago in the marrow of your life to be the one who does not leave. That is all this story has ever been, a chain of presence, a legacy of pause, a lineage of people who understood that true leadership starts the moment someone asks for help, and you stay. The world will forget the headlines, the fund names, the buildings, but it will remember what you gave it, a moment that didn't move too fast, a heart that didn't look away, a yes that held firm when everything else had said no. And when your time comes, when the next voice asks you, "Are you the boss?" you'll know what to say. You'll say it with steadiness, with love, with every name that came before tucked inside your voice. I am, because someone stayed for me, and now I'll stay for you. And just like that, the door will open again. The story will breathe again. The next heart will begin to hope again. And the world, for that one moment, will be made right again. Because you answered, and you stayed. And when that child who once sat alone in silence, who once questioned their worth, their place, their safety, grows older, they will remember, not every word, not every detail, but they will remember that when they asked, someone answered. When they paused, someone stayed. When they looked up and said, "Are you the boss?" someone didn't walk away. And it will change them. It will shape the way they speak to others, the way they listen, the way they show up, not just in triumph, but in tension, in need, in quiet corners where no one else thought to stand. They will become the next one, the next hand at the door, the next yes, the next pause. And that's how the story lives, not because it's told, but because it's carried, by those who once needed it most, by those who never forgot the feeling of being seen. And one day when they too are asked, "Are you the boss?" they will smile, not because they're ready, but because they remember. And they will say it the way it's always been said, "I am now, and I'm not going anywhere." And the story will continue, not because someone wrote it down, but because someone chose to live it, again and again and again. And when that answer is given, firm and gentle, unshaken and true, the world shifts, not in thunderclaps, not in headlines, but in tiny, irreversible ways. A child breathes deeper, a hand relaxes, a question stops echoing because it has finally been answered, and the story, this story, lengthens, not with epilogues, but with footprints, left behind by every person who chose to stand still when they could have walked away. You'll see those footprints in the most ordinary places, a diner booth where someone sat too long but wasn't rushed, a library corner where someone cried quietly and someone else slid a tissue across the table, a bus stop where one person waited 5 minutes past their ride to make sure the kid beside them wasn't left alone. That's the story now, not ink and pages, but presence and pause. And you are a part of it. You who have read this far, who have stayed, who have whispered, "I'm still here," without needing to say a word. You are now among those who carry the first question. And when you are asked, in whatever form it comes, spoken, written, or simply felt, you will not hesitate. You will smile, step forward, and say the truest line this story ever gave the world. Yes, I'm the boss today, and I'm not leaving until the door is open behind me. And the story, as always, will continue through you, and somewhere, just as it always has been, just as it always will be, a new story is beginning. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like a middle school hallway where a kid sits with their back to a locker, tears held too tightly behind their eyes. It looks like a counselor pausing before their next appointment, holding a card between their fingers with a familiar sentence on the back. It looks like a volunteer reading a first intake form and noticing a question scribbled in the margin. Will someone sit with me until it's over? And someone, somewhere always does. Because the story doesn't rely on any one hero, it lives in the choices of 1,000 ordinary people who have decided that the small moments, the pauses, are what make the world bearable. It lives in every time someone turns around, every time someone lowers their voice and asks, "What do you need?" Every time someone chooses to stay. You are one of them now. Not because of this story, but because of who you are, because you've already proven it. Every time you listened longer, every time you didn't look away, every time you showed up even when you didn't know how to fix anything. That's what matters. That's what carries this forward. So, when the next question comes, and it will, from a stranger, a student, a friend, a child, or even the quiet voice inside your own chest, answer it the way this story always has, with courage, with stillness, with your whole heart, and say, "I'm here, I'm listening, I'm the boss today, and I'm not leaving." And in that answer, a new chapter will begin, and the door will open, again, forever. And when that door opens, whether it's to a child's question, a stranger's silence, or your own reflection, you will know exactly what to do. You will step through it. You will sit with them, or beside them, or across from them. You will not fill the silence unless asked. You will not rush the pain to hurry toward comfort. You will not hand them hope before you've earned their trust. Instead, you will stay. You will breathe with them until they can breathe for themselves. You will carry the weight until they decide they can hold it again. You will show them, by presence, not performance, that care is not a transaction. And when they finally ask the question that's been living in them, whether it's loud or barely audible, you'll already know your answer, the same one that has echoed for 100 years. Yes, I'm the boss today, and I'm not leaving until you believe you're safe. That's all this story ever needed to be. Not a rescue and not a miracle, not perfection, just this, a steady yes, an open door, a life willing to pause. And you are that life now, which means the story is still alive, still unfolding, still circling the world card by card, step by step, heart by heart. And because of you, the next question will be heard. The next soul will be held, and the next door will open wide for the one who needs it most. And someday, when the wait is past again, when another child or friend or stranger asks the question that started it all, you won't have to wonder what to do. You will already be there, not because you planned it, not because it's your job, but because by living this story, you became the kind of person who shows up before you're needed and stays long after. You'll kneel beside them, or sit across from them, or simply be the only one who doesn't look away. And when they ask, with all the fear and hope a heart can carry, "Are you the boss?" you'll smile gently, maybe even reach for the card in your pocket. Maybe just hold their gaze, and you'll say it, as it was said to you, as it has been said for generations. I am. Right now, I am. And I'm not going anywhere. And the story will live again, not because it's finished, but because it never will be. It will stretch on. With every person who answers the question, with every moment someone stays, with every open hand and silent yes, until the world forgets how to leave, and only remembers how to stay. And when the world finally becomes a place where staying is ordinary, where pausing isn't rare, where every child who dares to ask is met with an answer that does not flinch, then the story will no longer need to be told, not because it ended, but because it became us. It will be found not in plaques or policies, but in the reflex of compassion, in the knee that bends without thinking, in the hand that reaches back before being asked. And if someone ever wonders how the world changed, why fewer children disappear into silence, why more strangers meet each other's eyes, why doorways are held longer than necessary, they won't have to search very far. They'll find the answer in a note tucked inside a coat pocket or posted on a refrigerator. If you are the boss today, stay. Or in a question whispered by someone brave enough to still believe in hope, will you stay until it doesn't hurt? And in that moment, you, yes, you, will know what to do, and you will say, yes, until you believe you matter, until you believe I mean it, until the next one comes, and then I'll stay for them too. Because this story, your story, our story, was never about the first person who stayed. It was always about the last one who refuses to leave. And as long as you breathe and as long as you carry this with you, that last one will always be you. And if one day someone asks you how it all began, how you learned to listen like that, to stay like that, to answer without flinching, you won't recite a date. You won't point to a headline. You'll say simply, someone once stayed for me. And maybe you won't remember their name. Maybe they never gave it. Maybe all they did was stop, sit, and listen. But that was enough. It always was. Because stories like this don't live in history books. They live in moments, in pauses, in footsteps that stop instead of passing by. And now you are part of that legacy, the child on the steps, the question in the silence, the answer in the staying. You are the boss today, not in power, but in presence, not to lead with titles, but to lead with tenderness. So when the next voice asks, even in the smallest way, are you the one? You'll know, because you'll feel it settle deep in your bones, the way truth always does. You'll take a breath, you'll turn, and you'll say the words that carry all the weight in the world but never once feel heavy. I am, and I'm not going anywhere. And the story will go on, still open, still unfolding, still choosing you, and in that final truth, that simple, sacred vow, to stay, to listen, to answer the question no one else would. You will have become what this story was always pointing toward. Not a hero, not a savior, but a keeper of doors, a holder of presence, a protector of the pause where hope is born. And the next time someone folds a card into a stranger's hand, or scribbles a note on a bathroom mirror, or leaves a message inside a library book, they won't be repeating a gesture, they'll be writing your chapter. Because you stayed, because you listened, because when the question came for you, you didn't look for someone else to answer it. You stepped forward, and you said, yes, I'm the boss today, and I will be until the door is open behind us both. And with that, the story, as always, begins again. And so it does. In every corner of the world, in places grand and forgotten, the story begins again. With a question, a breath, a moment. In a classroom where a teacher notices the quiet kid who hasn't turned in homework but always shows up. In a train station where a stranger sees someone hesitate just long enough at the edge of the platform. In a hospital where a nurse bends beside a bed not to ask what hurts, but what's needed. In a foster home, a soup kitchen, a library, a break room, a hallway, a stairwell, where someone's eyes say what their voice can't. And every time, every single time, the story waits for you to notice, to pause, to choose, to hold the weight of someone else's first question and answer it not with perfection, but with presence. And if you've carried this far, if you've felt the story in your chest like something breathing beneath your ribs, then you already know it's yours now. So the next time someone asks, are you the boss? There will be no hesitation, no doubt, only this. You'll smile and you'll stay, and you'll say the words this world can never have too many of. I am, and I always will be. The door is open. The story is alive. And you, now and always, are part of it. And somewhere, tomorrow, or years from now, or maybe just moments from this one, someone will sit where they think no one sees them. They'll carry their fear quietly. They'll press their question deep inside, unsure if it's allowed out. They'll wonder if the world has room for one more ask, one more need, one more them, and you'll be there. Not because fate put you there, but because you chose to carry the story this far. You chose to keep your eyes open. You chose to become the one who doesn't turn away, and you'll see it. In the slump of shoulders, in the held breath, in the way their hands curl around nothing at all. And you'll sit beside them, or kneel, or stand guard quietly, just long enough for them to feel it. You stayed, and they'll ask, maybe in a whisper, maybe in a glance, maybe in no words at all, "Are you the boss?" And your answer will come not from duty, not from training, but from a deeper place, the one where every child who is seen lives inside you now. You'll say, "Yes, I'm the boss today, and I'll stay until you believe you are too." And then the story will begin again, right where it always does, right where it always belongs, in the pause, in the presence, in you. And maybe, just maybe, someday, far beyond now, someone will ask where it all began. They'll hear echoes of a fund, a courthouse, a man who missed a meeting, a boy with a question, a girl in a chair too big for her legs. But the truth is simpler. It began with a choice, to stay. That's all it ever took. That's all it ever will take. And now, somewhere, someone is holding a folded piece of paper, or standing in a doorway, or whispering a question into the dark. And they are not alone because you're here, because you carry this, because you know the weight of being answered, because someone once stopped for you, and now you will not let the story fall. You are the pause. You are the answer. You are the new beginning. So when it comes, when the silence breaks, and a voice asks, "Are you the boss?" you will say it with certainty, with compassion, with the power only presence can give. Yes, and I will stay until you no longer have to ask. And in that answer, the story breathes again, forever.